Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Train the Mind by NeuroSmart podcast, where we will discuss effective tools and techniques that prepare the mind for optimal performance under stress. My name is Melissa Yilmaz-Balban. I'm the founder and CEO of NeuroSmart, where we develop self-regulation training designed for law enforcement, military officers, and athletes. Today, our guest is Nicole Florisi. Nicole has extensive experience as an educator, police officer, and therapist. She provides frontline instruction in officer wellness, de-escalation, crisis communication, and force encounter investigations, and currently works for Force Science. With over 25 years of experience, she has held positions including communication specialist, patrol officer, patrol sergeant, investigator, and acting chief. She has held previous roles as law enforcement subject matter expert at VRTA and as the executive director for the Verde Valley Sanctuary, a shelter dedicated to providing services for victims of sex trafficking, sexual violence, and domestic violence. Nicole is also an advanced force science specialist graduate. She has consulted on several cases with experience in traumatic stress memory, forced encounters, and intimate partner violence. Nicole is currently working on her doctorate in clinical psychology. She holds 2 postmaster's degrees, one in human factors psychology and one in trauma counseling, and an MS in professional counseling and a BS in public safety administration and emergency management. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
So I always like to start with the personal background. So you started as a police officer, and you went through the ranks in lots of different positions. So now you're a officer wellness instructor as well as many other things. But what led you? I want to hear a little bit about a story of from being a police officer, being on the front line, to becoming on the coming to the training side and becoming an instructor. Can you tell us a bit about your journey?
Of course. So I still am a police officer in Arizona. I just work part-time. Obviously, my chief is super cool with my schedule and everything like that, because I do travel a lot for Force Science. So I'll actually be covering the street in a couple weeks. For me, I think it's important just not to lose that tangible reality of what it's like to work the street. I think it helps me maintain relevance with my audience. So I think that was really important. So I'm very lucky to be able to do that. But what got me down really the force encounters road and then into and I would take a step past officer wellness into what I would consider brain flexibility, because I think that's really the core. I think overall, how we're teaching officer wellness, we've heard enough about wellness. Wellness needs to incorporate brain flexibility. So that's my platform for wellness. But when I initially kind of got moved into, if you want to call it like internal affairs, and was going to be responsible for evaluating use of force and what that looks like, I felt like I wasn't qualified to do it. And that was like what was resting on my shoulders. And I thought, who am I to look at a video, read reports, make a determination on if force is, reasonable, all things considered, when I don't understand all the facets of human factors that are involved in this. And somebody's career, based on maybe my recommendation, my perspective, could make or break somebody. And I don't even know what I'm doing. So I initially went to the 5-day force science analyst class, which was mind-blowing. That was before I had my degree in human factors psychology. And that's where it took off. And actually, my agency didn't pay for it. I took a week vacation, paid for it out of pocket, because it was that important to me that that evaluation of those cases and that analysis, that could potentially cost somebody their career. And then it took off from there. And I worked in SWAT negotiations, for like 15 years as a negotiator. And I started seeing, obviously, a pattern. And that is officers who are successful are able to self-regulate. And I think I had mentioned this to you the last time we talked when I was at VRTA. We would never put an officer on the street without tools to use their weapons. We spend all this time in these high profile areas of guns and DT and less lethal. Not enough, and I'm not saying we do it well, but those areas. But why would we ever put anybody on the street without tools to self-regulate? Because nothing law enforcement tends to be successful from a macro view. Doesn't mean we don't have success in individual encounters, but from a macro view, we need tools of self-regulation, and that's kind of what got me down that journey. And because I spend a lot of time in communication and de-escalation, how can you allow for de-escalation to happen if you can't regulate yourself?
Right.
Self-regulation is key to successful de-escalation to occur, if that's possible for that, in that moment with that person. So that's kind of how I got down this journey and realized, obviously, after I got into therapy, I got tired of the message about post-traumatic stress that we're stuck in mitigation when we should be part of prevention.
Yep.
Brain flexibility is part of post-traumatic stress prevention. And I think we miss that component. We're stuck in mitigation for a lot of this. And those same tools are going to help people mitigate. But I kind of got wrapped around the axle about, wanting people to be more successful and to go from surviving into thriving. And that's really where I got. Survival can be a short-term goal, that moment, that day, that week. But for what we do for a living as first responders, I think thriving is our ultimate goal. And we don't have that without flexibility. And I would submit to you, in the brain and the body, they're connected, that mind-body connection. And that's so incorporating physical health into mental health, into being flexible about everything. So we're just more malleable in that, and we then thrive.
That's fascinating. There's so much there I want to dig into. So yeah, I mean, it's actually when you say prevention of PTSD, we don't put enough effort into it, but we maybe put more into how to deal with it after it happens. And if you think about PTSD, it is a state of non-flexibility, right? You're stuck in a past memory essentially, and that keeps on coming back, and you kind of start seeing the world from that. So it is a state of inflexible mind. So it does make a lot of sense to me. And of course, this is what we're researching in NeuroSmart as well. If we teach officers tools to be flexible, not only will they not get into that state, but also will likely bounce from that state faster than if they don't have tools, right? So I wanted to ask about some cases. Can you give me examples when you said, you were looking at these body cam videos and trying to make judgments on what's the reasonable response? And so what are some examples of, or maybe you encountered in your personal life where you think that stress is severely impacting the officer's judgment?
Well, what I can tell you, even from an overall view, where do officers, and I say some quotes, what makes it to the news, honestly? Take aside from the fact officers that are doing a great job, these narrow scope moments, right? Sometimes it's a little narrow snapshot in time, but where I tend to see things go sideways is when I call it the Q-tip, that I jokingly say that we should give Q-tips to everybody on FTO, because where do things go sideways with officers? When they internalize what's said to them, right?
Yes.
Quit taking it personal. And I think that's the biggest thing. When people internalize what's said to them, doesn't mean we're not human, doesn't mean we don't have reactions to things. Got it. But the bottom line is there's only one person at a scene who's paid to self-regulate.
Right.
Honestly, that's it. We're paid. That is part of our job, to self-regulate, to not become reactive in that moment. And where I see careers go sideways, this is just a general statement, is when people start taking it personal and it becomes about them. Law enforcement is not about you. I tell this when I teach. If anybody gets into law enforcement, first responder world, I would even submit this to the therapy world and psychology. If it's about you, wrong job.
Right.
Job. Right. It's a service above self job. So when I see people start to internalize things, and granted, you teach a lot about this, that combination between cumulative stress and acute stress, right, cumulative trauma and acute trauma, right? That muddies up the waters for our ability to moderate all of that and mitigate that. So we become very reactive, super reactive on calls, temper management, emotional dysregulation. And so, and I tend, and I can speak from personal experience on this. I tend to think of myself, I don't know that everybody else agrees, but I tend to be fairly humorous, and I deal with things with sarcasm, right? I mean, we have a gallows humor style in the first responder world, but I also had to realize that doesn't serve me well with a citizen. Am I in my own way, right? Even if I'm dealing with something. So I just started seeing when officers started taking it personal. Don't get me wrong, we deal with a lot of crap. People yell at us, use profanity, spit on us, attack us, all those kind of things. But if somebody's like, F you, guess what? Not about you. If they're swearing at you, threatening you, not about you.
Yeah.
What do you need to successfully mitigate this stuff? And what is most successful are these tools to self-regulate and the ability to be flexible in that moment. And let's be honest. Let's look at law enforcement. What do they hate? They hate change and when things, stay the same. So where's the flexibility in that? The flexibility.
Flexible culture.
Right. And we're not, to nobody's individual fault.
Right.
That's a cultural thing. So that's where I started seeing it, because any of the clips you see on the news where officers, and I do have a little different view than some people, and this might irritate a few of your guests watching this, but where do they look like they get in trouble? If they start yelling, if they start screaming, if they start using profanity, if they start doing all this kind of stuff. This is my perspective on things. Where would I most likely expect profanity? It would be in a high stress situation. Why are we going to take the human out of that encounter? Because what do people do when they get upset and stressed and angry or whatever, right? They swear. To me, where does it get lumped into? Unprofessional conduct, right? Conduct unbecoming, when that's a normal conduct, all things considered. The answer to that is, where's the self-regulation tool to mitigate that response? That's the bigger question. Where is the difference between going from reactive to responsive? If we have time in that moment, sometimes when we're aggressed and threat stuff, like things considered, we don't have it. But for the times that we do, if we don't know that, if officers aren't taught that, if it's not integrated, that's kind of what I see. And it's just that lack of flexibility, and it's not that they haven't been talked to about it. This is my frustration. We have talked officer wellness till we're blue in the face. Talk. Integration is what matters. And let's also say, let's look at firearms. Let's look at defensive tactics. Let's look at some of this other stuff. We can't get some officers who your gun is one of your ultimate tools. And firearms instructors, you've probably talked to hundreds of them in your work. There's still officers who shoot once a year, twice a year, on a tool that could potentially save their life, their partner, a citizen's life. We need the buy-in, and we need the buy-in from trainers too, to integrate tools. Like an example, when I teach de-escalation, a big component of de-escalation is the self-regulation key, because how can you allow for de-escalation when somebody's not self-regulated? So I usually ask people, like, what is your go-to technique? Like, breathing's the answer to a lot of problems, but what kind of breathing? So then you look at your work, right? The cyclic sigh. I usually take a kind of like a unofficial poll of my audience. Who's heard of box breathing? Who's heard of autogenic breathing? Right? Who's heard of the cyclic sigh? Right? Now, what is nice? More and more people, right? But when you have research like yours that says this is so effective in managing these physiological responses and dampening some of that acute stress, where are we in the conversation of, I don't want to talk about it anymore? Do it. Where are trainers integrating this? And then, oh, Nicole, we only have so much time. We only have so much money. Okay, you don't have to add time.
It takes 3 seconds.
Teach them sigh, and then do it on the dispatch, and do it when you're narrative driving, and do it in the FTO program, and integrate it. But we miss that. And so as a therapist, I would never have somebody leave my office. I'm teaching skills. If I'm doing skills-based therapy, I know when they leave my office, they can do it. Now it belongs to them once they leave, right?
I love it.
But I think it's important. We're not even modeling to where, hey, I'm going to teach it to you. You're going to do it with me. Now you teach me. Therefore, I know you can do it. That doesn't add a lot to the training process. And now where does it work? So, I mean, I think that's some of the weaknesses, although we're working our butts off. But I could talk to you for the next 2 years about playing piano. And if you can't play piano, me talking to you for 2 years about it, maybe you can plunk out a major scale at the end of the day, but it's not any integration of skills. And so that's my frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't talk too much about NeuroSmart in this podcast, but that's obviously what we're trying to do as well, is to integrate this into the training and to create self-awareness, right? Like with the biofeedback piece, you can actually see that you're still elevated from 3 scenarios before, and you have and most people are not aware of that. They're very surprised to see when they see the data that you're not in the same level that you were in the first scenario. And imagine something happened in this scenario, and then you have to go to a call. I mean, this, of course, now in the real context, it's a call after call situation, where I would, to your point about where things go wrong in the videos, and I hear this from trainers that I talk to, that usually it's somebody's tired, somebody's it's the second call, or they had a stressful call before that, and things just kind of accumulate over time. And it's such a preventable, low-hanging tool to teach them to, even if they're not able to do it in the moment, just do it right after the call. So So before you show up to the next one, because how we show up will change the course of that scenario. What I'm curious, you talked about de-escalation. So something that I struggle with, and in my observations, I mean, my experience is very limited in the last few years. I'm just kind of going from department to department and observing trainings. That's my experience. There are situations where, this is what I hear. Not every situation is de-escalatable, which is true. So you don't have time, or you don't need, or the right decision is not to de-escalate or try to de-escalate, but use force, fast or something. In what I'm struggling personally to understand what percentage of cases in your mind, police officers, patrol officers encounters are de-escalatable versus not. So
I don't know if I can answer that question. I'm just being honest with you. And here's why. Every situation is individualized, right? Because I could talk to you about a macro viewpoint where I'm like, hey, if we see these certain behaviors, there's a propensity that de-escalation may work. Okay, if we see these type of behaviors, there's a propensity for de-escalation. Maybe it is impossible, or it's going to be very, very difficult. And the reason I can't answer that is because de-escalation takes two people.
Yeah.
And there's no policy, mandate, general order, anything that says the person's going to play, that they're going to willingly participate. Yeah. That's why there's not a good answer for that. I mean, and I actually appreciate you saying, because a lot of people don't talk about, there's times de-escalation is impossible for many different reasons. And thank you for acknowledging that, honestly. Because I think that's part of a disconnect from the public. Yep. You could be the communicator. I could be the best communicator in the world. Doesn't mean in the moment, if you're in crisis or crisis-like behavior, that we can allow for de-escalation to happen with you. Because maybe there's other unsafe things going on, and you kind of hit one nail on the head. Sometimes the most appropriate answer to a call is a quick, appropriate application of force that's safest for everybody, yes. Me and you, and the public. So yes. The unfortunate thing is I can't put a percentage on it because it's so individualized. Yeah. Now, what I can tell you is there are behaviors that lean toward the potential, but here's the reality. The potential in safety for everybody is the factor that I think we cannot overlook, because potential is there. But if the officer doesn't have cover, doesn't have a place that's safe to build a relationship, there's other additional considerations of the crowd, other people around that we have to keep safe. We may not have the time. And then there's personality types or individuals exhibiting certain behaviors. The more contaminated someone is in their thinking process, the more emotionally elevated they are, the more non-compliant they are. There's certain behaviors that cluster together that lean toward de-escalation may be impossible. And so I don't know that I can answer that question effectively, but what I can tell you in my perspective is we do a heck of a lot better job than people give us credit for. And why do I think that? Officers are talking people in handcuffs every day. I mean, I really want, when I talk to people, I really want you to sit with what officers are doing. They're stripping people of their rights. They're stripping them of their liberty. They're restricting their freedom and their movement. And we talk people in handcuffs more often than not. Right. And the people we're going to fight with most of the time couldn't have been talked into handcuffs anyway.
Yes.
Then it's looked at as a failure on the officer.
Yes.
They did something wrong with no accountability for the suspect or the subject they're dealing with. And that is a frustrating point for me because I spend a lot of time in the de-escalation world. To be honest, you've heard the word, I've heard the word. It is such a buzzword. Officers hate it. It's turned into such a negative thing, when in reality, we are allowing for de-escalation as best we can all the time. Yeah. Some officers, I think what people need to understand, some officers are looking at patterns of behavior very quickly and assessing the situation very quickly and looking at it and saying, hey, this is a non-de-escalatable situation. I recognize this cluster.
Yes.
I need to deal with it.
Yeah.
And also the component I think is overlooked is de-escalation requires time.
Yes.
And how much time? And how much time do we have? And if you're going call to call, now this is, I would say, a process failure in the system, not of the officer. If you're like, you have stuff backing up, you're dealing with a crisis subject or somebody suicidal, and you got 3 DVs stacking up and you've run out of people, what are we going to do with that? Yeah. There's a conversation about that, because if we truly want to be safe and we truly want to build relationships, as you know, because you talk about like that acute stress response in the human body,
Right.
That takes time to change because it's blood flow issues and adrenal response and neurotransmitters and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We can't, de-escalation doesn't happen unless that changes.
Yes.
It has to change in the human body. Like blood flow has to go back to the prefrontal cortex. What
Mhm.
are we going to allow for de-escalation for if we can't get that? And
Yeah.
then we press it because we've been told you only have a couple minutes to deal with this, put a baby band-aid on it and go to the next call.
Yeah.
That I think is, and I know that's kind of a way roundabout answer to your question, but I don't think there is a really simple answer to say that.
Yeah.
You know, and even from a Monday morning quarterback, like hindsight bias kind of consideration, um, what does that officer know that we don't in that snippet of a video? Too, like if we're judging them, are we, oh, we're only going to judge them on verbal content? That's not fair. We don't know what else is going on. The
Yeah.
video is not representative of an experience, as we know.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things that nobody talks about. You know, a video is not a proxy for an experience. So even if somebody is hands-on with an officer and we don't, you know, and I'm saying I'm using this as a general, people don't think it's appropriate. We can't tell when an officer grabs somebody on video how much resistance is in that move, even if the person isn't struggling. What do they feel in that muscle tension? You know, there's so many missing pieces. But now I do believe we can always use more tools to be more professional in communication.
Yeah.
That's what I think. What I think the weakness in law enforcement communication is simply this: we meet emotion with logic, and that's going to backfire every time. We tend to be logical creatures, right? Linear creatures when it comes to law enforcement. Now, not that we're not creative in problem solving, but when we introduce logic too soon into an emotional situation, expect it to backfire in your face. And with
Yes.
limited time, what are we going to do? Try and reason with people who are unreasonable in that moment. And so I think that's part of that bigger conversation.
I love that. And I want to emphasize your point that first, the body cam doesn't really capture the whole situation, of course, because we don't know all the senses, that we're only using vision, and also even that vision is limited, right? You just see what's in front of you, not what you've seen before going into the scene or anything like that, or what's the camera might not be capturing. So you don't really, also the emotional, the human factors thing is completely not in the camera. So and I think, I personally think, and this again might be controversial, but I think departments can do a better job in educating the public about, so like, for example, citizen academies, what it means to be a police officer, because this is what I personally experienced when I started NeuroSmart. And I was, when I come from a scientist background, so I have no experience whatsoever with law enforcement. But for me, my inspiration initially was, well, these people actually face, life and death situations on a pretty regular basis. So here is something that stress science could potentially apply and could potentially help. So this is kind of where I got in. But then when I started, observing all these trainings, and also, went on some rides with the cops, I realized just that your average citizen has no idea what the officer, first of all, what the officer is experiencing. Well, first of all, just the bare statistics of, like, even that is not obvious, I think. And I think we should emphasize that officers don't show up to peaceful scenes. Like, that's not when people call the cops, right? So every time they show up, there is a potential criminal in that scene. And so, like you talked about arrests, right? Like, so it's not like this criminal or this person that they're dealing with is completely innocent and is unlikely to harm them. There is the officer's job is not to de-escalate. The officer's job is to provide safety for everyone involved, and that's the highest priority. The escalation could be, once that priority is set, could be the method to do that, to get there. Or it could not be in that particular situation, right, because it would put the officer's life, based on what we know about this person or the circumstances, it could put everybody's life or others' life in this situation at risk. So yeah, I do think that there could be better job done to educate the public about the difficulty of those decisions that officers make. And so when and I would say it's impossible, to be honest, without targeted training in
Right.
self-awareness, in self-regulation, to actually expect anyone to stay, calm and collected, and do the most optimal decision in that situation. And I agree with you. Officers are doing a really good job, actually, and overall, because these are people that are, put themselves, put others before themselves, and then they sign up for this job. And I think overall they're doing a pretty good job. Not to say that there isn't a room for improvement, but I look at it from a more wellness officer performance perspective than actual, like harm, because I think that officers are getting the hit here right now,
Yes.
because they're not trained with these tools to self-regulate. We'll talk about the tools in a moment, but like to self-regulate, to be aware, to make sure they're fine after repetitive encounters. They're getting the PTSD, the substance use, and down the line in their careers. And I think that's the bigger problem here. Just as my personal opinion. And that changed quite a bit when I got into it. I mean, I didn't go into it thinking the officers were the problem, but I was kind of in the middle. I was like, there's a problem here. These guys are in the news. What's going on? And when I got into it, I was just like, well, I mean, why do we expect them to make these decisions with this training? It's impossible from a neuroscience perspective. And of course, things will slip. But I think even more problematically, the officers will get hurt.
Right. And we are getting hurt.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your acknowledgement on that, because I think that's a piece people skip.
Yeah.
I think that we in law enforcement need to be better about having these educated conversations. You hear the therapist in me coming out right here, but like psychoeducation fixes a lot of problems in life for those who are willing to listen.
Yes.
Okay. If somebody's unwilling, you can only do what you can do, right? Provide the information, they're going to do what they want. But for people who just don't know, and I think in some cases that's the majority of our citizens, they are just uneducated in this area. They're uneducated in human factors, in decision making, in all of this kind of stuff. And truth be told, stuff from that, some people in law enforcement still, we're part of our own problem. We only know what we know. We don't, there are people in law enforcement who don't even want to think PTS exists. Oh, this is what you signed up for. Nobody signed up for these injuries to the brain. Nobody signed up for eating a bullet. Those are the things we're up against. Suicide rates aren't going down. Not really in any population, admittedly, right?
Sure.
But you have people in law enforcement, to include officers, leadership, even wellness and clinicians, who don't even want to agree that any type of trauma, and let's just say trauma stressor, I don't even want to give it a diagnosis. They don't even want to agree like some of this trauma stuff exists. They are trauma blind, right? And that's this isn't 20 years ago. We're talking, this is now that they don't want to have the conversation, or they think that human responses to these traumatic incidents should be penalized, right? And you're seeing dead babies every day, and SIDS babies, and drowned kids, and fatal accidents, and working sex crimes, and adults and children, and all these things. Take away the acute ones. Let's just deal with the cumulative, seeing this stuff every day for however many years it goes and goes, that there's going to be zero impact. That boggles my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, like historically, just looking at it, we know there's an impact.
Yeah.
Oh, don't bring your stuff to work with you. Don't bring your home life to work with you. Don't let this case bother you. Okay. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. That's not how it works. So I think we've been molded into this area of take the human out of the human experience.
That's really interesting. Do you think that the traditional law enforcement training is kind of modeled a little bit after the military style, and like being the tough guy and like
I haven't been in the military, so I can't speak for the training. I can say the structure is paramilitaristic. Agreed. We have that. But even if you left the military out of it, I would submit to you, yes, it had always been, you display no emotion.
Yeah.
We're supposed to, and honestly, however they want to say it, like you're suppressing that down. Let's take the wellness aspect out of it, right? But you're not supposed to be personal, or personable for that matter. You're like a uniform, and you aren't supposed to display any emotion, not just to the civilians, but to your colleagues. And when you do, you are ostracized. Now, it doesn't mean we're not making headway, because I don't want to take away from the people doing fantastic work out there.
Right.
But that is the culture. The culture is you are a robot.
Yeah.
You're a robot. So that I can definitely say. And obviously we have windows where we have people who are prior military, who actually bring a lot to law enforcement, also marginalized for being in the military.
Mm.
Like it's going to make them a poor police officer, and I think that's very frustrating. But then you have dual considerations of, hey, what impacts happened over here for you that maybe have not been managed or addressed. Now you're going to get, you know, additional considerations here. What are we going to do with that? And I jokingly say, the only time officers like the word trigger is when they're on the range, right?
Mhm.
Understanding triggers is like also key to success.
Right.
A lot of law enforcement, not all of them, but many were type A personalities, right? What
Mhm.
do type A personalities hate? They don't want to be a puppet. So if you lack self-regulation, somebody else is your puppet master.
Mhm.
Most human beings don't want that, right? So if
Right.
you understand your triggers and you know what they are, nobody gets to use them against you. It
Right.
doesn't mean you don't feel. I,
No.
I, I think that's what people, they think if you're like if you end up managing this stuff, like it's not managing the feelings out of you, it's helping you manage the feelings.
Right.
That's literally it, because nobody deserves to take this home to themselves, to their family, to have a toxicity culture at work. Law enforcement culture is toxic. It is toxic in the workplace. It's horrible on mental health. And it's not just law enforcement, it's corrections, it's
Mhm.
within communications, it's in the fire world, it's in EMS. Anything, like, just tuck this first responder umbrella over it. The culture is toxic overall. That doesn't mean people aren't trying to do the work to remove some of that.
Yeah.
But we don't like the touchy-feely stuff. We don't want to acknowledge that we're struggling. And admittedly, part of the problem is even when people do, like, we train them. You need to acknowledge when you're struggling. Call for help. Like, let us know.
Mhm.
They just get thrown to the wolves. They're
Okay.
thrown to the wolves. So the agency eats them up. The agency, organizational and agency betrayal is sometimes equally as problematic, if not more, than some of the stuff we're asking from the officers for self-regulation. When officers do their job, stripped of their identity, treated like absolute crap, treated like a criminal for doing everything we've trained you for, and then being just thrown to the wolves by the citizens who don't know. So it's not just the citizens. Unfortunately, we're a big part of our own problem with the
Mhm.
lack of education. But back to obviously the wellness and flexibility component, if we have that, lucky us, guess what it does? Regardless of how toxic that environment is, it helps you manage your feelings. It helps you maybe mitigate some of that emotional dysregulation,
Yeah.
that brain flexibility, those techniques. Like I jokingly say, breathing's the answer to a lot of problems. Some
Mhm.
type of everybody's breathing, right?
Right.
So why would it not be? And in therapy, you have relaxation breathing. If cops don't like the word, you can call it tactical. I don't care what we call it. I want you to do it, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Just do it. Mitigate. Like if we have those relationships, even if it's a squad relationship, even if nobody at the top cares, if the relationship occurs in training and within the squad for that cohesion, we are successful, because then we normalize flexibility and wellness and health. And I would say to you, obviously, it should be both physical and mental.
Right.
Like you can be in the best shape of your life physically and in an absolute crap spot in your brain. Or
Yes.
you could have the best mental health and be great and mitigated and everything like that, and really great in managing all this. And definitely should be in the gym more and eating healthier, and all that kind of stuff. One doesn't exist without the other.
Yes.
And I think we skip that.
Yeah.
And like you had mentioned earlier, before we start recording, what do we want from officers in that moment where they may lose their lives tied to decision making? Where's the decision making components? Where's the conversation about that? And where do we make, I put it in quotes, better decisions? What does that look like?
Right.
Well, even though we're still successful, we are very successful in law enforcement in a lot of this.
Mhm.
But if we can be responsive versus reactive, why would we not want that?
Right. Absolutely. Because it does accumulate. I think that's the reason why we can't just say, okay, it's luckily we didn't get, nobody got hurt, or like, yeah.
Right.
First of all, there's silent hurt, which is the mental hit the officers take over time. It might not be obvious right after that incident, but I do see it in the data, even in training. Even in an after training scenario, you see the officers still remaining elevated for 30
Right.
seconds
Right.
after 30 minutes after the training. And I can't imagine, in real life, where the stress is much higher usually, then, that we can't say nobody's hurt. Who, like, let's move on. There's a mental toll after all of these
But you
incidents.
hit the nail on the head with that 30-minute. We're seeing impacts in training. What a lost opportunity.
Right.
I mean, trainers and instructors are creating these scenarios that do some level of acute stress.
Yes.
Seeing the adrenal, the adrenaline, you're seeing jelly legs,
Which is
loss
good.
of fine motor control, right?
Right.
What a wasted opportunity. This is what normally happens. Oh, high five, you passed. Or, hey, you need to redo this scenario. You're a moron. I mean, it's not even nice sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
What a missed opportunity to go. All of this going on. Let's deal with that. Just like when
Yeah.
you had a really, really intense DV, but now you got to go to a dog barking call.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be here at the dog bark, right? You want to be managed. So we skip opportunities. And I would submit to you, just from lack of understanding that we have the time to do it there. But imagine just taking the time to teach those techniques that are successful, and teach flexibility, and teach, ways to dump some cortisol, to, do all that, to have conversations about when do we want cortisol dumped, when is it better to work out, how hydrated are you, like all those conversations, right?
Yep.
But we have the opportunity in training to say, okay, like you got jelly legs all over the place. Let's figure out what this adrenaline's doing to you. Here's how to manage it now.
Yeah.
And this is just like real life, because you had mentioned earlier, how much time do we really have to do it? You still have to drive to the other call.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
You have to drive to
That's
the other
plenty
call.
of time. Usually.
What are you not doing in that drive?
Yeah.
Even if it's 2 minutes, there's work to be done in those 2 minutes. And
And
we
I
are
would,
we are
yeah,
we
go
are
ahead.
teaching that opportunity. Go ahead.
I would actually encourage our listeners or citizens to go on, and rides with the cops, when sometimes local agencies allow that, or have these programs to, because when I did, one of the things that, like you said, on the way to a call, right? There is actually a lot of sensory information coming in that. The way to a call is not, oh, I'm driving, like
Right.
it's a very stressful part of the whole situation. You're already bombarded with tons of information from dispatch and others. And there's always this, I mean, for someone like me, I'm a little bit sensitive on the sensory side. I was just like, I'm already overwhelmed by the time we got there. And we didn't even, they might not feel the overwhelm. Most of these, and I was, usually I have the NeuroSmart device on the cop, and so I kind of see where they are, and they're in a super high level going into. They're just pumped usually, to go. Like it's like we're on, and it's a very I think dangerous spot to be while you're going on into the unknown, because you don't want to be that high and pumped up. You need to be a little bit more calm and collected, and it's very difficult, I think, because you're driving, because you're taking all this information. So I think it's very critical for law enforcement officers to make it a habit to do some self-regulation techniques on their way to the calls, because it's very easy to lose your baseline. It's really easy to just be in a very high level to start with. And then well, none of these calls that I went to were terribly scary. I mean, they were scary for me, but not terrible for what could have happened. No weapons or anything, but I was still a little bit scared because I could see the officer's state being really high, and I was like, where there is no more, like, what if something did escalate here? These officers don't have room to go even higher. They're kind of maxed out already because they're so pumped up for some reason. Both sensory reasons that are coming in, driving, all that night, but also internal reasons of I felt, especially for the younger or inexperienced officers, that they're more as type A, like you said, and they get this hype about showing up to a call. It's a good thing, but it needs to be regulated as well. So there's a lot that can be done just on the way to a call is my point. And it's a very I think critical time that can be very impactful because the call is right after. So it's really it could change the whole scenario basically. how you show
Oh,
up.
absolutely. And I just like that you're sharing that, because I don't think really people who haven't done a ride along, they don't understand all that sensory and potentially, honestly, sometimes, especially if you're already heightened, sensory overload.
Yes.
It is a lot of stuff coming at you. But it can be managed. Imagine, not that everybody gets this, you have two people in a car, like a trainee and FTO, or it's a two-person car. Imagine if somebody is unregulated, right? And you start hearing a lot of chest breathing, that like, instead of being like, hey, and we swear at each other and call each other names, right? Like, hey, you're acting like an idiot. How about, hey, let's breathe together. Hey, take a breath with me. Like, normalizing something so simple. Take a deep breath for me. Big diaphragmatic breath. Like, let's change that breathing cycle, right? I wouldn't want this on a call, and I wouldn't want to be this on a call, that right? Like, imagine you're a trainee, it's your first active threat, active killer, you're a little jacked up, right? How about, let's dump that. Let's not be that.
Yes.
Instead of like, hey, moron, like, you want to get yourself together. And I'm not saying everybody's going to do that, but I can tell you it still happens.
Yes. Yes.
And then we can, like, but then it's a good relationship. The relationship is healthy enough. And I would submit to you, whether you like the person or not, it's not about like, it's about healthy career, right?
Yes.
I don't have to let you to go, hey, let's breathe together. Let's take a deep breath, right? This big old diaphragm. Hey, remember we learned the cyclic sigh. Remember we've learned box breathing. Like, remember we've learned this. We did it together in training. Let's do it now. You have time most of the time. Granted, your call could be 10 seconds away and you're just like heading over there. But God, if all you have is 60 seconds, what can you do in 30 of those seconds?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the conversation. But yap about it isn't doing anybody any good, because so few people are going to take the yap into application. It needs to be application in training. And when we are given those fantastic scenarios, you mentioned it earlier, things become habit. And when you learn how to breathe and you learn, one of my favorite things about the cyclic sigh, it is quicker than some techniques, right?
Yes.
It is quicker. And I told you my personal story about, I had written I think it's fantastic for managing my mom's tachycardia and AFib. Like, I truly believe that. I was just flabbergasted by how quick, because most of the time I'm talking about it with wellness and flexibility. And I was just like, holy cow, right? It took 15 to 30 seconds of somebody's life to change it.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, we have many times 15 to 30 seconds to just do a little bit of grounding. Working in trauma, I see a lot of stuff out there, and some stuff that's being pushed isn't real great. It's not rooted in science. I hear all about meditation all the time. Meditation is crap for trauma. People, unmanaged trauma.
Yes.
People don't understand a lot of these rebound effects, right? I don't need officers transcendentally meditating for 2 hours. What about 30 seconds of grounding? What about some breathing?
Yes.
That's all it takes. What are you doing before you come to work? What are you doing when you get home? What can you do when you're at the office and you're safe? Trust me, we go to the office, you got to take time to use the facilities, whatever types. A little bit, and you took 60 seconds of your life and did some grounding and breathing, and then started typing your report. Imagine if whatever shift you work, you moved your workout time to after shift to dump some of that cortisol.
Yes.
How many officers just honestly don't stay hydrated on duty? And sometimes I wonder if females are worse than males, because like, it's a whole thing to go to the washroom as a female. And like, you don't have any shortcuts.
In all professions, not just law enforcement.
I mean, so how many times are we maybe dehydrated by nature of not wanting to have problems in the middle of a call? What I'm saying? So, unhealthy eating. Somebody said to me one time, I have to order out because I don't have time to meal prep. No, because you didn't take time to meal prep. Like, reframe it.
Prioritize.
Yeah. So it's like, I mean, granted, it's a whole lot of stuff going on with that, but I think we're just missing some simple things that we can do. And there's only so many minutes in a day, but a lot of them are wasted.
Yes.
A lot of them are wasted.
Absolutely.
So we can do a lot, even on duty, to settle ourselves down a little bit.
It's interesting you talked about the FDO situation where, they put yourself together, like, what are you doing kind of thing. And well, I had guests where he teaches a very basic yoga pose at the end of for 5 minutes at the end of use of force training. And one thing that he mentioned to me is everybody starts talking while they're doing yoga, right? In about a minute or so, everybody's silent. It just naturally happens because the body, because of the yoga's power, and that pose's power to kick in the parasympathetic system, it actually shuts down speech. And that's also what I found in my research while I was at Stanford was this extra talking can be a sign of anxiety or unregulated stress, and it actually usually doesn't really help. So that moment of it's something as simple as let's stop talking, stop yelling or mocking each other, and take 30 seconds to just pay attention to our breath and take a few sighs. I think is very, very powerful. And instead what we're doing is we're going the opposite way. We're talking, we're mocking, and that's actually not helping the nervous system and putting us in a worse spot. Even if it's done with good intentions to get people out of that zone, it doesn't work. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that particular scenario. So before we end, I really want to actually talk about your training. Because you have mentioned that in your trainings, in your courses, you have the people leave with tools. They know what to do. Tell us a little bit about how you teach wellness and yeah, what are some tools that you use? We talked about breathing a lot, but how do you
Yeah, I
incorporate
think breathing,
those?
like I said, fixes a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
even when I teach de-escalation, there's a little component of self-regulation.
All right.
So I teach the cyclic sigh. I teach it,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody has to teach me,
Uh-huh.
and then I usually pick on a student, or it's a volunteer. I ask if anyone wants to volunteer. Hey, I'm going to do it. I want you guys to do it with me. That's my model. I'm going to demonstrate it. We're going to do it together. And then I usually have a student or two. Hey, I just taught you this. Are you comfortable teaching it to me?
Mm-hmm.
Are you comfortable teaching it to me? And I actually usually offer, I say, look, let's start there. I actually do, a grounding technique. And we're not really set up for this, but usually somebody's got some kind of cup in front of them. But I teach the grounding with like a hot drink. I'm like, I want you to imagine this is before you go to work or you're back at the station. I need you to go just somewhere quiet for just a minute, like turn your phone off. There's nobody around, get a hot drink, something you like to smell,
Yeah.
right? And just sit there and put your hands on that cup. Just take those big, deep diaphragmatic breaths, right? I want you to feel that. Like it's very sensory, because I
Yes.
know you do a lot of this with
Yeah.
grounding. And then just, when you're inhaling, so that's why I'm like, love this scent. I joke with officers. I'm obviously, when you're at home, this is not a hot toddy event. You know what I mean? Like no alcohol, because that's a
Yeah.
cultural thing.
Right.
But basically like enjoy that scent, when you take a sip of that, feel that liquid all the way down, right?
Yeah.
And breathe. And I tell them, I said, now if you do no grounding, if
Mm-hmm.
you do no grounding at all, I said 30 seconds of your life, your brain's going to be all over the place when you start this. You're going to have to physically, like, basically pull your brain back in to this event. And you
Right.
do it once a day, right? Or you do it before you go to work, once during work, or after work. But then I have somebody teach it. So I demonstrate the cyclic sigh. We do that. I have somebody teach that. I do some grounding and sensory, like the 5 senses. I usually cut it down to 3.
Mm-hmm.
I usually do vision, audition, and then kinesthetic, so tactile. Because I don't always have something to smell, you know what I mean, or eat. So I usually focus on 3 out of the 5. I teach box breathing with bilateral processing.
Mm-hmm.
So regular box breathing for the, in for 4, hold for 4, blow all the air out. But I have officers do it. This is, I learned this from Dr. Robbie. I talked to you about Dr. Robbie Other Tapia. Her book, One Badge, One Brain, One Life. I pull some of her coping strategies out. But this box breathing technique, basically with a rectangle. So if you're looking at a square in front of you, this could be a windshield for a moment, a TV, a teaching board.
Mm-hmm.
You are doing eye movement with the breathing. So
Mm-hmm.
you're adding a bilateral component
Mm-hmm.
with your eyes while you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
She also adds, this is kind of like a paired technique. She adds in that to pick a word that is important to you. And I'm just going to use calm. So
Mm-hmm.
as you inhale, you're thinking the word calm, right? As you're holding, you're thinking, then blow your air out. So you start to see, okay, you got breathing, you got bilateral eye movement. Now you've paired what we call a cue word with it.
Mm-hmm.
And We also hand out in training like paracord bracelets, and we bring some essential oil with. And then we tell the students to pick, an essential oil that they like. Lemon, I said, you already have negative pairings with odor. Let's work this in our favor for positive. So we give them a scent that they like. It's popped on a paracord, which they could wear. They could hang it on their overhead, wherever they want to carry it. So when they inhale for that initial breathing, that scent starts to be paired in the brain. So the goal is maybe as soon as you start to tell yourself the word calm, like you're already kicking physiology in the direction you need, right?
Yes.
When you inhale that scent, like lemon oil or whatever it is, boom, you've got that.
Right.
So we pair techniques together. We do grounding. I'm a big fan. I'm not endorsing it, no kickbacks, but of like brain fitness technology like Lumosity and stuff like that. Don't have to pay a dime. But something, even simple math problems, people don't understand how rigid the brain becomes, right?
Okay.
And just doing like attention techniques and pattern recognition and simple math problems, like Lumosity has one. It's just raining simple math problems, right? And you're supposed to solve like 2 + 2, 3 × 2, 5 × 6, right before the water fills up. And stuff like that, where just trying to keep that brain flexible with we don't normally do. So it's things like that. It's changing, workout stuff, because what people tend to overlook in the law enforcement world is their psychological Kevlar. That's really the foundation of wellness and brain fitness. You put on these tools all day long, you got your bat belt, your vest, like we all have that kind of stuff. And great, we need those. Right. But what is your psychological Kevlar that you have? I had a clinical supervisor who asked me when I transitioned, because I was working as a therapist while I was still a police officer. Nicole, how do you not take the therapy stuff home? And I was a little cocky at the time, right? I'm like, what's going to bug me as a therapist compared to what I've seen on duty? Honestly, in my head, I wasn't cocky with her. I love her. She's the best. But in my head, I was like that. And she goes, well, what she does, she's also a yoga instructor. She's got the best posture of anybody I've ever seen in my life. But she goes, Nicole, when I come to work every day, she goes, I put on her psychological armor. And so when she sits with clients, she imagines armor going over her and she puts a shield in front of her. And she said, therefore, nothing a client tells me penetrates the shield. And it bounces back. There are no negative impacts with that. And she's like, and she teaches first responder yoga and stuff like that now. She works with first responder population, but she's like, what is that? And I don't think first responders consider that. They look at their physical tools, but they don't look, what are my psychological tools? Now, everybody will agree. They know how, like, we're complicated houseplants. They know, I should dump refined sugar. I should do weight bearing exercises. I should be hydrated, get some sunlight. Okay, great. Until that doesn't work.
Right.
Until that doesn't work. And then what's past that? And I think we're not ready for what's past it in many cases, and when I teach, I also talk to people about your coping skills are going to help you on any day, but they're for your worst day, not your best day. That's what people aren't considering. It's when you're working graveyards, you've only got a couple hours of sleep. Maybe you're in an IA at work, but still working the street, but there's family problems, maybe grief going on at home, like all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And then you've got the call. Yeah. And what do you do with that? And part of the problem is we penalize people. It's punitive for emotional reactions. Instead of identifying, I'm seeing emotional dysregulation. The career doesn't end here. The career ends here. Yeah. Maybe if I fix this here, instead of penalizing the officer, maybe if we're like, hey, we've identified this, what can we do to prevent more symptoms and mitigate and do all that here? Maybe the career doesn't end. I don't understand why we want to dump so much money into people and chuck them out the door and hire new people. It is a financial investment for the people that we are. Yes. But instead of penalizing, now granted, I understand sometimes there's a violation that's egregious that requires it to be. I'm not disputing.
We're not talking about that. Yeah.
But what about the pattern before? And we ignore this pattern. Punitive, you're in trouble. And it's all dumped, in my experience, it's all dumped under conduct unbecoming. Yeah, emotional dysregulation. Oh yeah, conduct unbecoming, sure. Conduct that's a problem, let's fix it. How about the conversation about fixing it? So it's breathing, it's grounding. There's people doing great work. If I ruled the world, Doc, if I ruled the world, I would hand everybody Dr. Robbie's book, that One Badge, One Brain, One Life.
So could you repeat the title?
Sure. It's One Badge, One Brain, One Life.
Okay.
It's preventative maintenance for the brain. I consider it a do book versus a read book. It's a very, very great, fantastic book that is very real toward first responders about trauma. But it incorporates coping skills. It helps it also helps educate, right? What I commonly see with first responders, and so do my colleagues that do clinical work, no matter how much we talk to a degree, everybody feels alone in their symptoms. They're
Isn't it
alone.
fascinating?
Yeah,
But
even though we
that's
can,
because how the brain works.
yeah.
It's
So it's like, let's just keep reminding people. That's why I say
yeah,
wasted opportunity in training when you're feeling all sorts of ways.
yeah,
Wasted opportunity to not say, what do we do with this? Hey, you know what? How you're feeling is absolutely normal. Jelly legs, fine muscle tremors, like that breathing, totally normal, all things considered,
yeah,
right? Or where's the conversation about an abnormal response to an abnormal situation? Hey, that's normal. You're going to feel all sorts of ways for a little while.
yeah,
There comes a point where feeling all sorts of ways isn't good.
yeah,
And we want to mitigate that.
yeah.
So it's kind of grounding. I like to do a lot of interactive stuff with my class because I want them to be able to walk out the door from my class. And if one of their friends literally jumps out of a corner and goes right and scares the living daylights out of them, they can literally go, I can reset this, you know,
Yeah.
that transfers on duty. But I tell people, you know, it's funny or it's stupid until it's culture and it's accepted. We just got to bridge the gap. If we do grounding skills every day at shift briefing, it's funny until it's important. It's funny till, oh shit, excuse my language. Oh darn, we didn't have time to do our grounding skills today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we didn't have time to breathe, but I'd give them that book. And then I'm also a believer in, like bilateral processing. Everybody from me, I should have bought stock and Slinky a long time ago. I think Slinkies are the answer to a lot of life problems because officers sit, they ruminate, they stew. And if I can just get them to pick up the dang Slinky, at least we're doing some basic bilateral processing.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I would put it everywhere. I would put it in the internal affairs investigation. I would hand it to victims of victim crimes. They'd be just around fidget spinners and slinkies and all sorts of stuff because we have the wrong expectation of how people, to include officers, of how they behave after critical incidents.
Yes.
And how long that's going to last. So if we could incorporate better education, if we could normalize that therapy is okay, if we looked at therapy as like going to the weaponsmith to hone ourselves into the tool that we should be, to be successful in our endeavor, to stop carrying things that don't belong to us. Sometimes first responders with our unhealthy lifestyle, we also wear trauma as a badge of honor. I earned this. It belong to you. Put it down. It's not yours to carry home. It's not yours to carry at all. Military and first responders. I mean, that's a real conversation. But part of the problem is we normalize lack of sleep. I mean, with a good sleep hygiene protocol, we could probably fix 90% of problems in law enforcement anyway. Sleep fixes most of life's problems. Healthy sleep, right? Good sleep.
Quality sleep.
Lack of sleep. If we could, and we celebrate that. When you go to the academy, even though now they have like, family day and awareness day and all that kind of stuff, the conversations outside of that day are, if you're in a relationship now, this is your starter relationship because you're going to be divorced 2 or 3 times. It's going to be nothing but infidelity. Infidelity is rampant in the first responder world. Why? Because it's dopamine seeking. Doesn't mean people don't love their spouse, right? Or partner. But what are ultimate hits of dopamine? Reckless behavior. Infidelity is one of those. Alcoholism, NyQuil babies. We celebrate that. How about instead of the conversation about, oh, you're going to be on your 3rd divorce by the time you hit your 20 years, where's the class on healthy communication skills and having a successful, healthy relationship in this environment? Yes. No, we throw each other under the bus. We normalize things, so until the culture says, I am not willing to accept these behaviors, we need a little more work to make differences there. So, I mean, I just want to touch on that we in general law enforcement have to come up to the table and be willing to have those conversations. A
lot to be done by leadership. I think on that.
Set the example.
Yeah.
We can individually set the example, and nobody's perfect. Don't get me wrong. We're going to make mistakes. We're human beings. But if we just start talking about what is healthier, and implementing what is healthier, we also learn by modeling, right? So instead of modeling crap behavior, why don't we model good behavior? And maybe people do that, or even if it just gets them to think, maybe it takes a minute for that to sink in. Maybe it's a year and they're like, I don't have to feel the way I'm feeling. Like so-and-so, they went to talk to somebody and they had a good experience. Like, look at them, they're healthier now.
Yeah.
And they see people thriving. Like I said, people survival is a short-term goal. Thriving is the ultimate goal.
Right.
And first responder, all people deserve that, but first responders, especially by nature of service above self, first responders and military to me is a sacred calling.
Right.
And why the crap culture that we have? Why these bad, negative consequences and outcomes? Well, we have to have bigger conversations on the culture level, but then the rest of it belongs to us as an individual of what are we going to do? I think the work you're doing and the tools that you're showing us are successful are part of that conversation. Dr. Robbie's part of that conversation. I hope I'm part of that conversation when I talk to people, and again, thanks for this opportunity, but just, if all I get is the wheels spinning
Yeah.
and maybe it's in 6 months, good.
For sure. Planting the
That's all we do.
seeds.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all need to plant the seeds, and yeah, I mean, this is fantastic. Thank you for all your wisdom. For the listeners, I mean, we have a lot of notes here, but I think your emphasis on the grounding, on the breath, on the simplicity of things that we can do, fidget spinners, put them in the internal investigation rooms. I love that. And creating this culture where wellness is not something that's it's proactive. It's not it's not something that you fix after it's broken.
Right.
Just really, 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 really important. And we all need to start planting these seeds. And I do believe the more I have these conversations, that things are going to change. Culture is going to change. That's going to take time, but it will change. And so thank you again for your time. And the recommended book is Bomb Badge One Brain, One Life.
Yes. By Dr. Robbie Adler Tapia.
By Dr. Rabbi Adler Tapia. Usually I get asked for book recommendations, so I want to emphasize that as well. Well, thank you again, and thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. And yeah, we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye, Nicole.